All right, everybody, buckle up. Today, we're tackling a cinematic creature feature that really makes you go, the 1998 Godzilla flick. Yeah, you heard right. Whether you're a diehard fan of the Big G or someone who just enjoys a monster mashup every now and then, this deep dive is going to be a wild ride. We're going deep into the heart of a whole bunch of reviews and analysis on this one, and let me tell you, it gets interesting, to say the least.
You know, it's funny how this movie still gets people riled up over 20 years later, and bam, it still sparks some fiery debates online and off. What is it about this American Godzilla that gets under people's skin? Or do they just love to hate it? It's a real head scratcher, and that's precisely what we're going to dig into today.
So picture this. We've got Godzilla, the big cheese himself, rising up from the depths, tearing through cities like they're made of cardboard. Classic monster movie mayhem, am I right? But here's where things take a turn. Instead of sticking to the tried-and-true ancient monster origin story, they decided to give it that 90s, we messed up, it's science's fault spin. You know, like, oh, whoops, our bad, those nuclear tests. Yeah, it turns out they didn't just pollute the ocean, they created a skyscraper-sized lizard with a bad attitude.
It's like they were trying to capture that same atomic anxiety that made the original Godzilla so powerful back in the day, but it kind of misses the mark, don't you think? The original Godzilla was a reflection of post-war anxieties, the very real fear of nuclear annihilation. This one, well, it feels a bit more like a monster movie cliche, you know.
And those cliches, they don't stop at the origin story. Our sources pointed out some, let's call them unique plot choices that had me scratching my head. For example, there's this scene where Godzilla, who is absolutely massive, by the way, is dragging this fishing boat across the Pacific, you know, like it's a chew toy. And then, not too long after that, boom, he's in Panama, just strolling through the jungle like he booked a last-minute all-inclusive vacation.
Makes you wonder if Godzilla has a rewards card for all those frequent flyer miles, doesn't it?
Right. You'd think with those travel times he'd at least be jet-lagged.
It's these little things that make you question the whole, okay, but could it actually happen aspect of the film. But hey, maybe that's part of the fun, right? Sometimes you just got to turn off your brain and enjoy the ride, even if the logic has gone completely out the window.
Oh, absolutely. Sometimes you just want to watch a giant lizard stomp on stuff without questioning the hows and whys. No judgment here. Speaking of questionable decisions, can we talk about the human characters for a second? Or at least what our sources had to say about them?
Ah, yes, the humans. The essential yet often overlooked counterparts to our monstrous leading role.
And in this case, overlooked might be putting it mildly. We've got Matthew Broderick as Dr. Nick Totopoulos. You know, the type that nerdy scientist who's suddenly thrust into a save-the-world scenario.
It's a tale as old as time, isn't it? The ordinary guy who's suddenly got the fate of humanity resting on his shoulders. We see it all the time, especially in these big disaster flicks.
I mean, I love me some Matthew Broderick, but even I have to wonder if he ever got tired of playing the surprise scientist role. Or maybe the script just didn't give him much to work with. Who knows?
That's a really good point. It's like the age-old struggle. How do you write compelling human drama when you've got this gigantic city-destroying lizard stealing the show?
Tough gig for sure. But hey, it's not all doom and gloom on the character front. Our source actually had some good things to say about Jean Reno's performance. He plays this French Secret Service agent, Philippe Rocher, and apparently he's the bright spot in the whole thing. Our source even said his attempts to fit in with the Americans are unintentionally hilarious. Just picture it. Jean Reno, trying to blend in, probably wearing one of those classic striped shirts and a beret, chain-smoking Galos's cigarettes.
That's amazing. See, this is what I love about movies like this. Sometimes the unintentional humor is the Dob kind. It's that so bad it's good factor. But then again, it does make you wonder, was Reno's character supposed to be funny? Or was that just a happy accident? It's a fine line, you know, finding that balance between humor and, well, the impending threat of total annihilation.
Talk about a fine line. We've got Jean Reno bringing the laughs, but then there's the baby Godzillas. Our source did not hold back on this one, and yeah, their description of these mini monsters has me equal parts intrigued and terrified.
You get the baby Godzillas. You either love them or you love to hate them, right?
It's like, how do you even begin to process that? Baby Godzillas. What will they think of next?
I think it really depends on how you feel about those monster offspring tropes in general. Sometimes they work, sometimes they totally miss the mark. Like, you've got to nail the design, the behavior, the whole 9 yards. Otherwise, it just ends up feeling silly.
Oh, totally. Like, if I'm supposed to be terrified of this creature that's supposed to be menacing, and all I can think about is how much it looks like a wind-up toy, well, you've lost me.
It's all about believability, even in a world with giant radioactive lizards.
Speaking of giant lizards, can we address the elephant in the room? Or should I say the giant iguana in the room?
Hmm?
The Godzilla redesign? Our source called it like they saw it. A giant iguana. Not exactly the awe-inspiring behemoth we're used to, is it?
It's a pretty stark contrast to the original, that's for sure. You have to remember, the original Godzilla, with its jagged scales, its upright posture, that wasn't just a monster design, it was symbolic. It represented something deeper, you know? It reflected the fears of a nation that had just lived through the horrors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This new Godzilla, on the other hand, well, it's a product of a different time, a different culture. It's sleeker, more agile, some might even say more Hollywoodized.
Yeah, it's like they took this icon of cultural significance and gave it a makeover, slapped some CGI on it, and called it a day. Speaking of CGI, our source also had some thoughts on the special effects, which, let's be honest, haven't exactly aged like fine wine. I'm curious to hear your take on this one. How do you think the effects hold up today, all these years later?
Yeah, it's true, the CGI is definitely of its time. We're spoiled now with what's possible, the level of realism filmmakers can achieve. But I think it's important to judge the effects in the context of when the movie was made. This was 1998, still pretty early days for computer-generated imagery. There were bound to be some growing pains, but there were also some genuinely groundbreaking moments, like that scene where Godzilla swims past the Brooklyn Bridge. Ambitious stuff for its time.
That's a good point. It's easy to forget how revolutionary those early CGI-heavy films were. Kind of like with the original Star Wars, the effects might look a little rough around the edges now, but back then, mind-blowing.
Exactly. It's all about pushing those boundaries, seeing what technology can do. And hey, maybe in another 20 years we'll be looking back at some of today's CGI with the same fondness.
It's like a time capsule of filmmaking, isn't it? But going back to the redesign for a second, it wasn't just the looks that changed, was it? That iconic atomic breath, the one that could melt steel, that got a bit of a makeover too.
Oh yeah, that was a big one for the fans. They took Godzilla's signature weapon, that blast of pure radioactive fury, and turned it into, well, a glorified fire-breathing lizard.
Not exactly the same impact, is it? A creature designed to embody pure destructive power would have a bit more oomph to its, everything.
Right, and it really makes you wonder, when you're dealing with a character as iconic as Godzilla, how much is too much when it comes to these redesigns? Where's the line?
It's a tough one, for sure. I mean, we've seen it with other movie monsters, haven't we? King Kong, the creature from the Black Lagoon, even Dracula. Sometimes the updates work, sometimes they fall flat.
It's a delicate dance, trying to stay true to the original while still bringing something fresh to the table.
Yeah, it really makes you think, what is it about these giant monsters that capture our imagination so much?
I don't know, there's just something about them, right? They tap into some primal part of our brain, the fear of the unknown, the awe of something so much bigger than ourselves.
Maybe it's a good reminder that even giant lizards can make us think.
Absolutely. And whether you loved it or hated it, I think we can all agree that the '98 Godzilla got people talking. And that's not always a bad thing.
It definitely left its mark, for better or for worse.
For sure. I mean, even with all its flaws, it introduced a whole new audience to Godzilla.
Yeah, it's like it re-kick-started the whole franchise in a way.
Exactly. And now, all these years later, people are still debating it, still dissecting it.
Makes you wonder what they'll be saying about it 20, 30 years down the line.
Right. Will it be a cult classic, a cautionary tale, or just a weird footnote in Godzilla's long cinematic history? Only time will tell.
A cautionary tale about what happens when you give Hollywood a giant lizard. Sounds about right.
Hey, you never know. Stranger things have happened.
True, true. Well, I think we've covered just about everything there is to cover on this one. We've explored the highs, the lows, the good, the bad, the downright bizarre.
We've talked about the plot, the characters, the special effects, the cultural impact.
We've even touched on the age-old question of whether or not it's okay to give a giant lizard a makeover.
It's been a wild ride.
It has. But now it's your turn to weigh in. What did you think of the 1998 Godzilla? Did it capture the magic of the original? Or was it a monstrous misfire? Head over to the comments and let us know. And hey, while you're there, tell us what other cinematic creature features you'd like us to deep dive into next. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and most importantly,
Keep diving deep.